Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're synchronized to neighborhoodnewsstudio.com, and we have a really good lineup today. We have kicking it off will be Mr. John O'Laughlin with McDuff Lives, and then we have at noon George Webb from Europe, and at 2 o'clock Protecting the Nest with Carol McIntosh, Amber Connor, and Tara Starr. And at one o'clock we have Jesse Hall, who will be probably substituting for George because George doesn't have always the best internet. So we have at 4 o'clock the news hour, and so now I'm going to turn it over to John and take it away.
All right, thank you very much, John. Yeah, welcome everybody. Eek, 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 and happy Friday to all of you who celebrate. Oh my, yeah, I do. I'm glad it's Friday. I have Saturday and Sunday off, so uh, that's nice. I'm only doing five or six shows a week right now. Maybe I was doing 11 when I started out, and it was really rolling. When we got up to 11,000 subscribers, and then we we started getting in trouble with the COVID stuff, and we just so now we're fighting our way back, but. Frankly, I don't know if we're ever going to get to 11,000 again on YouTube. They're always going to knock me down if I get to a certain point. So, that's why I have three channels right now. One of them has 7,500, I think. The other one's 1,100 and 1,200. So, anyway, we do have a presence. We do have a good number of subscribers, but anything you can do to spread the word would be gratefully appreciated. We want to have a large amount of people out there aware not only of what's going on in the news today, which doesn't really help a lot if you don't have the background, and that's what we try to do here at McDuff Lives, is to provide some depth and some background to what's going on. Yeah, algorithm. Brightmore, how are you? Kathy Sue, Kathy Sue, Kathy Sue, my dear, it's so good to have you with us. And anything you guys want to talk about, we can talk about it. It's open chat today. The picture I used for the thumbnail today of my dad, it's a screen grab out of a larger picture in which he was smiling at being given a performance award sometime in the late 60s, and nice to see him smile, isn't it? You should have heard him laugh. My dad, as you know, is a big guy, and when something struck, he didn't laugh, at just anything. But when something struck him funny, he would start with this little wheeze. You'd hear this, and then, and then suddenly his chest would heave, and his whole belly would shake when he started laughing. And laughing would be so loud it would fill the room. He had a marvelous way of expressing, happiness or joy. And I keep getting reminded that we need to keep joy in our lives. That's the Schiller message we got last week from David Shaven. Joy, that's, if without that you got nothing. So don't don't stay depressed all the time. I have my battles, you have your battles, and we have this big battle together to try to save liberty. But oh gosh, we have to do it with an ability to laugh at ourselves, to laugh at the fallibility of humans. Now, I was thinking about, with yesterday when I was pulling out this book to emphasize when we talk about who was Nelson Rockefeller. Nelson Rockefeller and evangelism in the age of oil, and this book is a Bible of the exploitation and destruction of the existing communities in South and Central America, as well as in the West of America, in the United States as well, uh, by Nelson Rockefeller. And in the course of doing such things, the principle of we are the good people, we are the chosen ones, you know, how else can I put it? The elect, the elite, the ones that God favors. And so they are willing to partner with the uh, the the fundamental or right wing Protestant religion folks that want to evangelize. And all I want to do is evangelize, right? So that means, I'm going to go to heaven because I can go out into the wilderness and convert savages. That's been going on a long, long time. That way of, it's a way to justify resource exploitation in lands that you don't own, and colonialism. So this is what I've been thinking about for a topic was we have, and I've mentioned this before, we have in Southern Maryland some clear evidence of lingering Confederate sympathies, and we could say that throughout the South. And we often have confrontations over whether maybe the sons of Confederate veterans are allowed to display their material at a public event, or whether the Confederate battle flag should be flown at all. Now we have our neighbor, our sister state, Richmond, tearing down all the statues on Monument Avenue because they're Confederates. And of course, here in Maryland, we had the removal of the Roger B. Taney statue from Annapolis. Why? Because he was the author of the Dred Scott decision, written in 1859 by the Supreme Court of the United States, in which Roger B. Taney, the the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, said that a Negro has no rights that need to be respected by a white man. And he said that in 1859. And he is a resident of our neighboring county, Calvert County. And if you go over to the Patuxent River, which is one of the borders of Charles County, and you can look across the Patuxent River into Calvert County, and you can see Roger B. Taney's estate, and his house is still there, and his land is still there. It's used now as a farm, a horse farm, I believe. But in any event, that is the central geographical center of the Southern oriented, judicial philosophy. Now, Southern Maryland was never a part geographically of the Confederacy, but its leaders and sons either fought in a Maryland Confederate unit or fought in the general Confederate Army or Virginia units, because mostly they had to go to Richmond to sign up for service in the Confederate Army in 1861, 62. And most of them did. Now, Yeah, let's be fair to Maryland. Okay, I'm talking about Southern Maryland. Let's not even worry about Baltimore and all of the rest of it because that's a different story. Okay. Um, for instance, there's 5 counties. Southern Maryland was Charles, Calvert, St. Mary's, the 3 southern ones, but also Prince George's, which is now majority African American and the noted as the wealthiest majority African American county in the United States, and Anne Arundel County, which is where Annapolis is, and it is much more cosmopolitan than it was in the days that it was, noted as part of the 5 Southern Maryland counties. But it is where the tradition of Southern style thinking still persists in many ways, as it does in Charles, St. Mary's, and Calvert counties. Prince George's County, back in the 60s and 70s, gradually, because of the influx of African Americans, became um, majority African American. Doesn't mean that there's not still a lot of Southern thinking white families and people there, but it's no longer considered part of Southern Maryland the way the 3 counties are. And the same things happened to Anne Arundel, but I think it's important to realize that those historically are, quote unquote, Southern Maryland counties. So all of this to say that there's always a conflict between the display of Confederate military people or honors or emblems or flags, which triggers a lot of emotional pain for a lot of people. And that emotional pain comes from their knowledge of the abuse of their ancestors. And in the case of African American people, the display of the stars and bars, the Confederate national flag or the Confederate battle flag, or any of the various other types of flags that symbolize the Old South, are emotional triggers that kind of mess up your day. Um, it's like if you're a white, well, I don't even know how to try to translate it, but try to imagine, seeing a symbol of the oppression, enslavement, murder, cruelty, terrorism, practiced upon your ancestors, and having to see that on a daily basis when you drive to work. And I find that trying to say something difficult and subtle and without being offensive to anyone, okay? I think that we have to distinguish between respect for the ancestors' military and political and social achievements in a time when the general population understood that Black people did not have the capacity to run plantations, to run businesses, or to get a higher education. And it's an unfair judgment because they weren't offered the opportunity to learn in the first place, right? But yeah, let's leave those sites aside, John, please. Um, Now where was I? Okay, so I'm trying to make this point that I don't think anybody has a problem with respecting a general or an ancestor that had an honorable military career, even for the Confederacy. But what I think has happened is the respect for that military I'm sorry, I'm hearing a phone ring in the other room. It's distracting me. The respect for the military prowess or sacrifice of your ancestors to a cause, even if it turns out to have been the wrong cause, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Probably had. I know I had an ancestor that fought on that was served in the Confederate Army. I know. Well, a collateral ancestor, like a great grandfather's nephew, I think. But you can respect them for having gotten, either got drafted or volunteered to serve what they thought was the honor of their state, you know, at a time when the status quo was that yes, there is slavery, and yes, we do believe that we shouldn't let them be free because if we did, they'd mess everything up. That's the part that's so hard to talk about. And that's the part that I think we need to talk about. Because although the respect for an honorable general or in the past in the Confederate Army, in and of itself, I don't think is a terrible thing. The problem that it brings with it is the mindset that existed in the minds of those Confederates because they were wrong. Confederates were wrong about the mental capacity, the physical and mental differences between the races, which really is just a matter of color of skin and pigmentation. And they were wrong. But when you display the symbols of military people that fought against, the Union on the theory that, Southern rights include the right to enslave people, then you can see that you're supporting the idea behind slavery in the first place, which was that this is a different race. These are like not even human, and they're best used as servants or field slaves. So that's my that's my problem with this Southern attitude. Fine. I don't care if you love the old traditions and the petticoats and like to watch Gone with the Wind. And I don't care if you are respecting somebody that rode with Mosby, in your family, or somebody named Lee, or it doesn't matter. What matters is how do you treat people that don't look like you today? How do you treat people that are of a different pigmentation? You can say, I guess, no reason to say you can't say race, but we don't mean that there's divisions within the human race. It's just that that's what we say. We say, well, that person is of a Japanese, that person is Chinese, that person is Asian. Well, we can also break it down into Western Europeans, the Celts and the Saxons and the Slavs and the Goths. So many different, what could be called races, just call them cultural groups. But I guess my real point today is to simply say there exists a mindset, and I think it exists within our government, that still feels, even though the Confederacy lost, and even though we can say, well, if slavery was wrong and slavery should never come back, but still believes that there's a difference up here, that there's a difference in capacity. The Jimmy the Greek problem, if you remember that the black people couldn't be a quarterback in the NFL. And that's what I think we have to break through. People that still carry that in their beliefs. I mean, suppose your grandfather was a Confederate officer, or great grandfather, and your parents told you what a wonderful person he was. Well, okay, I respect that, but he was wrong about one thing, and that is he was wrong about the need to keep the races apart. They were scared to death that their daughters were going to get, you know, seduced by some swarthy black guy. And that was the suffering of the 19th century and the suffering of the 20th century. And now it's the 21st century, and we got to get past it. March 1807, King George, this is a Brightmore dinosaur. King George III signed into law the Act for the abolition of the slave trade, banning trading in enslaved people in the British Empire. I was interested to see that David Underdown had published today on his Twitter uh, actual text that says that there was exceptions to that. That any country, any land owned by the British East India Company was accepted. The island of Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, was accepted. So it wasn't a complete banning by any means. As long as they had a port, as long as they had a vehicle, such as the British East India Company. And then, of course, you have your Americans that are going to take up the trade. If the British won't do it, then you just change the flag on the ship. Say, oh, my partner over there in Baltimore, he'll do that for you. It's it's nice, if you're British to say, we banned slavery in 1807 or 1808. But again, banning slavery and then giving people the full respect of equality as humans is a completely different thing. Username says we were past it, but people keep using it for political advantage. Oh boy, isn't that true? Isn't that true? You remember that about getting back to the turn of the century, as we were talking about in the book, The True Flag by Kinzer. Uh, we're looking at a time when the black people in American government were doing quite well, as far as, comparatively speaking. They were a lot of the administration of the government. In Washington, D.C., there were lots of ways of getting higher education and, working your way into the professional world. And that was put to a stop by Woodrow Wilson's administration, in which he let go all of the black people. He went right back to that Southern mentality. You know, that's important, very important thing to remember, that we did start down the road of equality, but the reaction that came about was so strict, so severe. And you bring to mind a number of interesting thoughts. The first one that I wanted to share is that without racism, they couldn't have fought World War One. So here's Wilson, right, gets elected. on will keep us out of war. Mm. World War One starts 1914. Wilson elected 1916, if I recall, or reelected. Anyway, he ran on "I will keep you out of war. We'll keep you out of war." And as soon as he got elected, within a year, we were in the war. But it wouldn't have been possible for us to send all of those doughboys over there if they hadn't been motivated by D.W. Griffith. Oh yeah, thanks, John. Woodrow Wilson. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, it was 1916. Oh, D.W. Griffith, the famous great filmmaker, had produced on behalf of certain interests a movie called The Birth of a Nation. And the theme of this movie was that there was a white nation that was born by the KKK, that was birthed by the KKK for the very precise reason of ruling over all of these black people that didn't have the capacity to rule themselves, to keep them in order, to keep them in line, to keep them from stealing things. And that movie brought together a racist organization in the South and in the Midwest and, all over Indiana, Illinois. This was a big deal, a big, big KKK revival. It was driven, as I understand it, by British behind the scenes to once again keep us divided, to once again give that Southern mentality a boost in that we're better than them, and to give that military style organization of a Masonic group, a clan, the Southern jurisdiction of the Albert Pike generation, that's them, right? And so when the propaganda hits about the Huns and the Huns, spitting babies on pikes, you know, with the pickle helmets, it makes it easier to appeal to the Southern sense of honor that we've got to defeat these Huns, these subhuman barbarian European barbarians. We've got these barbarians here we got to deal with, but now poor old England is getting attacked by these barbarian Huns. So the connection between racism and anti-Hun, or the anti-German feeling that was basically legislated. I mean, all of a sudden you couldn't teach German in the schools. That's exactly, and Wilson had the first of the Ministry of Truth bodies. Talk about enforcing propaganda on the American people against our will, even before World War One, before we entered the war. So Wilson, of course, was one of them. And, don't even start about Colonel House. Colonel Edwin Mandel House was a plantation-minded Anglophile imperialist. So to sum up what I'm saying, the revival of racism served the interest of the British Empire in getting American will to fight on behalf of, the Southerners that generally do fund fill out the bulk of the troops. Give them the will to fight. Yeah, there's Edwin Mandell House. You can trace his background into Texas blockade runners in the Civil War, and his uh, relatives were were involved in the financing of the Confederacy and the building of the Confederate ships like the Alabama in Britain. There's an interesting comment. Laura Willingham, I am almost 61 years old and I am a Southerner. I have so much to say to this subject, having lived also outside the South. The segregation I have experienced has been outside the South and continues. That's right. I think in many ways the South does get right now does still gets has that lingering tag of racism, even though I think, places like Atlanta, Georgia, for instance, where I have cousins that live, um, I don't see it there. We could talk to Amber Connor about it, but I don't see any white against black racism the way that I do sense it up around Washington D.C., where I live. I just it's not an I hate you type of thing. It's just I don't want to be around you type of thing. And in general, I agree with Laura. That's my experience when I'm in the South. Is that it's not. Now, I haven't been to Texas, so let's leave Texas out of it. But yeah, even to the extent that it exists, I think we have a duty to try to make sure and educate people that that's wrong. That's thinking from the past that was used to justify horrible, terrible things. And if not flying the stars, the Confederate battle flag is a price we have to pay. I'd like to do that, but I think it's more important that we positively say they were wrong. Taney was wrong. Who was the governor of Georgia? Alexander Stevens, that said the same thing in many ways. They were wrong. So let's face up to it and move on. Baker says, I don't see racism around here in Central Texas. Well, that's good. And you don't see it overtly. You see a the opposite, a reaching out, an attempt to look like you're. But I don't know. All right, I better change the subject. I knew I shouldn't start into that, but it's something personal that has brought it to mind, and I just think we need to get past it. Mike Panzer says we cannot memorialize the Confederate cause. Also, Whitey must die. Well, there are some people that feel that way, but I haven't met any. I don't like. I think we should memorialize the Confederacy, but I don't think that we should glorify it. What I do, I'm willing to go with the economic argument. I'm certainly willing to say that it wasn't slavery; it was the economic um, attempt, economically to conquer the South. But I'm not I'm not talking about the war. I'm not talking about the general factors. I'm just talking about one specific thing, and that is when we encounter people from a Southern tradition, we shouldn't get hung up only on the issue of are they going to display this flag or are they going to, celebrate Lee Jackson Day? Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, General Lee, General Jackson, a lot of people really revere those guys. Um, I I do not. I don't agree with their philosophy of life, and that's the problem I have with it. Doesn't mean, they didn't do a great job at Fredericksburg. Baker says, I don't know what is Southern tradition. Well, I'm trying. Maybe you should come to Southern Maryland, and maybe they don't have it in Texas anymore. But I don't know. I think there's probably different parts of Texas where you can certainly find. I mean, what do you think about it, George Bush, for instance, or George W. Bush? You, you don't think he's still racist, do you? You don't think he'd objected if one of his daughters wanted to marry a black man? Maybe not. I don't know. Look at the James Baker. Speaking of, sure he's not your family, but and Bush isn't Texas. Okay. W is a goofball racist. Yeah, he is. Remember that picture of him beating on the tom tom drums in the African ceremony like he was, yeah, guy hasn't got a clue. Zaganastra says class is a better lens than race to understand society. Yeah, I think you're right. But I think also when you look at class, you say, well, how come the upper class looks so white? Mm, Why is it that, is it true that Princess Diana was killed because she was in love with a so-called black person? That um, the way that some Northern Europeans will consider Arabians to be black because they have darker skin. They'll just say they call everybody black because they have darker skin. Was she killed for that? Is there still, in the royal family and in the elites of the British Empire and the City of London a desire to keep the race pure, the Anglo-Saxon race? Yeah, I think there's a strong desire to keep that race pure at the top. It may even, as you can trace it back to the pharaohs. You only marry people that are in your bloodline. And the nobility of Europe, if you watch Sean Ross, you'll see how he traces the whole deal from Egypt to Rome, you know, and then from there into the different areas where it spread out into Europe, and the nobility, would rule over the existing population, you know, as dukes or princes or counts, and they would all marry other dukes or princes or counts because they were all noble, because they all had noble blood. Why did they have noble blood? Well, they could trace it back in many cases to Rome, but the secret part is that it goes back further than that into Egypt, and from there you can trace not only that, but also the secret traditions from the uh, the stonemasons, which gradually get into this Freemasonry, and look at what happens in the 18th century with Freemasonry just taking off like crazy. Well, these are people that are there to kind of support the nobility in giving a kind of a secret society in between the nobility and the common people. And that secret society becomes powerful in that there's a lot of them there, and they have some money, and they're usually the merchants or the traders and they become the oligarchs, and then it becomes the oligarchs against the royals. And now we're at a place where they've already settled everything. The vertical rule, the rulers that traditionally imperial rulers have gotten their oligarchical supporters, represented in my mind by the Freemasons, but also Kabbalah and all of that mystical stuff, an oligarchical rule. And now those two are working together to completely destroy any power that the rest of us have, the common people, the hoi polloi. And we as the common people are now got the boot on our neck, from Aldous Huxley explaining to us that no, you're going into a totalitarian nightmare that you'll never get out of, ever. Why? Because these oligarchs and the nobility have found a way to work together, mutually profit by continually sucking all of our assets out of our pockets, whether by taxation or by inflation or by simple fraud and theft. Yeah, I'm happy to be a common person myself. It's interesting. In so many ways, the mission of America in the world is to raise up everybody else to the status of those people that thought they were illuminated, the people that thought that they, had this special acknowledgement of of an understanding of the big picture. I'm enlightened. I have I have I have wisdom. There's I always think whenever I think of wisdom, I think of that Cardinal Dolan at Trump's inaugural when he was just the big fat guy with a red, his red outfit and his puffy cheeks, and he's this cardinal, and he's a politically powerful guy. And in the middle of what he's talking about, he just puts his hands up and looks at God and says, "Wisdom." You know, And this is what they think. In other words, this is what I'm saying is that those people that think they're enlightened, that they have, wisdom flows into their particular brains directly from God. Okay, their particular brain gets wisdom, from Athena, from Sophia, however you want to put it. The goddess of wisdom comes and gives me instructions as to how I should handle this. And then I know because I'm enlightened. And so I can now tell everybody else, all right, here's what you need to do. You need to do this. You need to do that. You kill those guys and you guys take over this country and everything's going to be great. And how do you know? Because I have wisdom. Where'd you get wisdom? I have a special connection. I'm enlightened. I'm an Illuminati, Illuminatus. I'm Voltaire. I'm Frederick II. Well, that is the problem, is that you are selfish. you don't want to share what you've learned with everybody else, because then everybody else would say, oh, well, then we can just bypass you and do it directly. Why should I buy it from you when I can just get it from the source? Whether it's a patent or just information, or whether it's, something special like uh, a, uh, uh, a way to do something cheaper than anybody else did it before. You know, how do you get people that think they're elite and special to stop thinking that way and realize that no, no, I like to say God didn't make junk. If God made humanity, then why isn't all of humanity within our brotherhood? If we're making a brotherhood of man, you know, if we are really sincerely doing that, why do we think that we can restrict that to just those of us that come to these, meetings and wear smelly robes from time to time? And that's the power of that oligarchical bond. It can only have that power by depriving other people of their stuff, their assets, their resources. That Freemasonic idea was very, very popular in the 19th century in both the South and the North. And they thought they were doing their Freemasonic duty on both sides. And you do hear stories of chivalry between the sides based upon seeing a Masonic emblem on somebody's chest. That noblesse oblige. We have to do it because we are the smart ones, the nobles, the nobility, of Sweden asserting power over the Slavs. Something we haven't explored very much, but it's been on my mind is, who is this family called Noble? Nobel, the Nobel Prize, the noble people, the rulers, of the Slavic people 1,000 years ago. Noble over what? The nobility. So now I'm looking at Sweden and thinking, well, they have this facade of social democracy and everybody being happy. They don't make a lot of money, the common people, unfortunately, but they have terrific public services, right? Well, look at Carl Bildt, look at the Wallenberg family, and then decide, is this, the happy version of communism? Or is it just the fake version where the elites still own everything and control everything and people are ostensibly happy, but they have no chance of rising up? You're going to be on that 40,000 euro a year salary forever. That's your place. You've got your niche, but don't even think about, being a very, very wealthy person, because you're not going to rise. And that's what I think America is here for, is to give everybody an equal chance, everybody an opportunity. And so, my plea is just, if don't judge people, just don't judge people. It doesn't matter what they look like. See what they can do. Uh, I feel like I'm not speaking very well, but I'm speaking from the heart, because I see I see folks that I think should understand this that don't understand it. And they get into positions of power and they think that they're not racist. You know, they don't see it. That's what I'm saying. You know, think about it. Think about it. And, somebody that in a position on a school board, on a county council, on a any place, it's state government. I think, the higher up you go, the more likely you're going to find existing mental, Southern style racism or British style racism, where it's an elite attitude that exists in the brain that you should not mingle with certain people that are lower than your status. And don't let your daughters marry one. And it sounds outdated and clunky, but I think we haven't dealt with it yet. And we maybe have been getting rid of it in the 19th century, but Jim Crow came along and ruined it for us. And then D.W. Griffith came along and ruined it for us. And the British, with Gone with the Wind, glorifying the South, uh, we're not over it, but at least we can talk about it now. And thank you very much for allowing me to do that. It's time for me to call it a day. And I wish you all a very, very happy weekend. Once again, thanks for supporting us here at screamingospreys.com. And thank you very much to Neighborhood News Studio once again for bringing McDuff Lives into your lineup. And I look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you again, John.
Thank you, John, and have a great day. Okay, we have the rest of the starting off the rest of the day with George Webb. George hasn't been able to establish an internet connection yet, so we're going to play a couple of his latest Twitter feeds to get it started, and then we'll bring him in as soon as he jumps on. We're going to outro John's segment with a bit of John O'Loughlin and Norman playing a duet a few weeks ago.
Say, does that star-spangled banner o'er the land of the free and the home of the
Welcome to World War DARPA. This is George Webb. and I've been going all over the world to different bioweapons plants in England, Porton Down. Of course, I've done DynCorp here in the United States and Indianapolis,